While hiking, I stumbled upon an old, deserted cabin. It was tucked away deep in the woods, far from any trails. I was curious and decided to take a closer look. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The windows were dirty, the door was slightly ajar, and the whole structure was covered in vines. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was dark and musty. There was old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs everywhere. I found some old clothes, a few rusty tools, and a table with a half-burnt candle. It felt eerie, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had lived there once. As I explored, I noticed some strange noises coming from outside. It sounded like footsteps. I peeked out the window and saw a man standing near the edge of the clearing, just staring at the cabin. He was dressed in old, worn-out clothes and had a wild look in his eyes. I decided it was time to leave and quickly made my way out of the cabin. On my way back to the main trail, I kept thinking about the man. Who was he? Why was he there? The encounter left me feeling uneasy. When I got back to my campsite, I told my friends about it. They joked that I had probably seen a ghost, but I knew it was real. The next day, we decided to hike back to the cabin to see if we could find any more clues. When we got there, the man was gone, but the cabin looked even more run down than before. We explored the area around the cabin and found some old paths leading deeper into the woods. We followed one of the paths and came across another cabin. This one was in better shape, and it looked like someone was still living there. We knocked on the door, and an old woman answered. She seemed surprised to see us but invited us in. The inside of her cabin was neat and tidy, a stark contrast to the one we had found earlier. We told her about the deserted cabin and the man we saw. Her face grew serious, and she told us that the cabin belonged to a hiker who had gone missing years ago. She said his name was Daniel, and that he had come to the woods to find some peace and solitude. He built the cabin himself and lived there for a few years. One day, he just vanished without a trace. The locals searched for him but never found any clues. The old woman said that some people believed he got lost in the woods, while others thought he met with foul play. We left her cabin with more questions than answers. The thought of the missing hiker and the strange man haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened to Daniel. A few days later, I decided to go back to the cabin one last time. When I got there, I found an old journal hidden under one of the floorboards. The entries were written by Daniel. He wrote about his life in the woods, his struggles, and his fears. The last entry was disturbing. He mentioned hearing strange noises at night and seeing shadowy figures in the woods. He wrote that he felt like he was being watched and that he was going to confront whoever was stalking him. The journal ended abruptly, leaving me with a sense of dread. I realized that the man I saw might have been Daniel, or maybe someone who knew what happened to him. The mystery of the deserted cabin and the missing hiker remained unsolved, but the experience left a lasting impression on me. I'll never forget that hike or the feeling of being watched in those woods. The cabin and its dark history are something I'll always remember. A chilling reminder of how easily someone can disappear without a trace. During a camping trip, I noticed someone watching us from the woods. It was supposed to be a fun weekend with my friends at a rural farmhouse surrounded by fields. We set up our tents in the backyard, eager to escape the city for a while. The first night was great. We cooked over the fire, told stories, and enjoyed the quiet. But then, as we were winding down, I saw a figure standing just at the edge of the woods. I pointed it out to my friends, but by the time they looked, it was gone. They laughed it off, saying I was seeing things, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The next day, everything seemed normal. We explored the fields and did some fishing at a nearby pond. But when we got back to the farmhouse, we found our tents had been rummaged through. Nothing was missing, but stuff was definitely moved around. We tried to brush it off as an animal, but I couldn't help but think about the figure I saw. That night, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I kept hearing rustling noises and seeing shadows moving between the trees. My friends were starting to get spooked too. We decided to take turns keeping watch, but the night passed without any incidents. The following evening, things took a darker turn. We were sitting around the fire when we heard a loud bang from the direction of the farmhouse. We rushed inside and found one of the windows broken. There were muddy footprints leading from the window to the kitchen, then back out the door. We checked the whole house, but there was no one there. We called the local police, but they didn't find anything either. They said it was probably a prank or some local kids messing around. We tried to enjoy the rest of our trip, but the atmosphere had changed. We were all on edge, constantly looking over our shoulders. On our last night, one of my friends, Jake, decided to sleep inside the farmhouse. He said he couldn't handle another night in the tent. We all agreed it was a good idea and set up makeshift beds in the living room. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps inside the house. I sat up and saw a shadow moving down the hallway. I called out to Jake, but there was no answer. I got up and followed the shadow, but when I turned the corner, no one was there. We searched the entire farmhouse and the surrounding fields, but Jake was gone. His bed was empty and his shoes were still by the door. We called the police again, and they launched a search. They brought in dogs, helicopters, the whole 9 yards, but Jake was nowhere to be found. The case remains unsolved. The police never found any clues about what happened to Jake. The farmhouse, once a place of fun and escape, now feels like a place of dread. We all went back to our lives, but none of us are the same. Every time I think about that trip, I get a chill down my spine. I keep wondering what I saw in the woods that first night and whether it had anything to do with Jake's disappearance. It's a mystery that haunts me, one that may never be solved. I discovered unsettling photos on my phone that I didn't take. It all started when I decided to explore an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. I've always been fascinated by old, deserted places, and this factory had a creepy charm that drew me in. The factory was huge, with broken windows and rusted machinery scattered around. I spent the whole afternoon taking pictures and exploring every corner. When I got home, I started scrolling through the photos I'd taken, feeling proud of my little adventure. That's when I noticed something strange. Mixed in with my photos were pictures I didn't remember taking. They were all of me, but from odd angles and distances. One was of me walking into the factory, another was of me looking at some machinery, and a few were close-ups of my face, taken when I wasn't looking. My heart started to race. Who had taken these photos? I tried to remember if I had seen anyone else at the factory, but I was sure I was alone. The photos were unsettling, but I convinced myself that maybe I had accidentally taken them somehow. I decided to forget about it and get some sleep. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me. At work, on the bus, even at home. It was like someone was following me, but I couldn't see anyone. That night, I checked my phone again and found more photos. They were taken from outside my apartment through my window. I felt a chill run down my spine. I decided to go to the police. They took my report seriously and asked to see the photos. The officer's face grew serious as he looked through them. He asked if I had noticed anyone suspicious or out of place recently. I told him about the factory and how I hadn't seen anyone there. The officer told me that the photos matched the MO of a known serial stalker who had been terrorizing people in the area. This stalker was known for taking photos of his victims without them knowing and leaving no trace of his presence. The police had been trying to catch him for months, but had no leads. I was terrified. The idea that someone was watching me, following me, and taking photos without me knowing was horrifying. The police promised to increase patrols around my neighborhood and advised me to be extra cautious. Over the next few days, I kept my curtains closed and tried to stay aware of my surroundings. Despite the police presence, I still felt like I was being watched. I started noticing people who seemed out of place. A man standing too close to my building. A car parked down the street for too long. A woman who seemed to be following me at the grocery store. One evening, I found a note slipped under my door. It simply said, "I see you, that was the final straw." I decided to stay with a friend for a while, hoping the stalker would lose interest if I wasn't around. The police continued their investigation, but the stalker was never caught. The experience left me paranoid and anxious, always looking over my shoulder. The abandoned factory, which once seemed like a fun adventure, had become the beginning of a nightmare. I'll never forget the fear and helplessness I felt, knowing that someone out there was watching me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The photos on my phone were a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we can be, even in our own homes.